A man survives the deadliest valleys of Afghanistan, only to face his greatest humiliation on his own front lawn. After serving his country with honor, a decorated black veteran finds himself slammed against the concrete, handcuffed by aggressive police officers for the crime of moving into a quiet, affluent neighborhood. But the officers making a mockery of his service have no idea who is scheduled to visit him today. When a black government SUV pulls up, everything changes. The neighborhood of Oakwood Estates was the kind of place where the most pressing emergency was usually a stray golden retriever or a dispute over property lines and overgrown azalea bushes. It was a manicured, aggressively tranquil subdivision in the affluent outskirts of Alexandria, Virginia. The lawns were uniformly emerald, the driveways were pristine asphalt, and the houses boasted ritual, wraparound porches that suggested a deep, undisturbed comfort. For 34-year-old Devon Perry, this quiet was exactly what he had paid for. Devon had spent the last 12 years of his life in environments that were anything but quiet. As a former staff sergeant in the United States Army Rangers, his 20s had been defined by the deafening roar of Black Hawk helicopters, the staccato crack of distant sniper fire in the Korangal Valley, and the heavy, suffocating silence that followed an IED blast. He had a silver star locked in a mahogany box in his bedroom, a slight limp in his left knee when the weather turned cold, and a desperate, clawing need for absolute iur. After his honorable discharge, Devon had transitioned into high-level cybersecurity consulting for the Department of Defense. The lucrative contracts had allowed him to purchase the sprawling, two-story colonial at 412 Sycamore Lane in cash. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could finally lower his guard, plant a garden, and sleep through the night without waking up drenched in a cold sweat. But Oakwood Estates had a different kind of tripwire. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early October. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen oak leaves and distant wood smoke. Devon had taken the week off to finalize his move. Dressed in faded gray sweatpants, scuffed combat boots, and a plain olive-drab t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad, heavily muscled shoulders, he was busy working on his front porch. The heavy wooden front door had been sticking, a victim of the humid Virginia summer, and Devon was out there with a sander, a hammer, and a heavy iron pry bar, meticulously adjusting the hinges. Across the street, at 415 Sycamore Lane, the horizontal blinds of a massive bay window twitched. Brenda Higgins was a woman whose entire existence seemed fueled by neighborhood gossip and an unwavering belief that she was the unofficial guardian of Oakwood Estates. She had lived in the subdivision for 20 years and took pride in knowing every vehicle that belonged on her street. She did not recognize the man on the porch of the old Miller house. To Brenda, the situation looked entirely suspicious. The house had been empty for 3 months after the Millers moved to Florida. Now, a tall, imposing black man in rugged clothes was standing at the front door, wielding an iron bar, trying to pry the frame loose. Devon paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked out over the street, taking a deep breath of the autumn air. He noticed the blinds twitching across the way, but paid it no mind. He was used to being looked at. At 6'3", with the rigid, upright posture of a career military man, he knew he cast a formidable shadow. Inside her perfectly climate-controlled living room, Brenda's heart fluttered with a panicked, self-righteous rhythm. She didn't walk over to introduce herself. She didn't look for a moving truck, which Devon had already returned the day prior. Instead, she reached for her cordless phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed 911. 911? What is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Yes, I need police at 412 Sycamore Lane immediately, Brenda whispered, as if the man across the street could hear her through the double-paned glass. There is a large, dangerous-looking man breaking into the house across the street. The owners moved out months ago. Can you describe the individual, ma'am? He's African-American, very tall, muscular. He's wearing raggedy clothes and he has a weapon, some kind of crowbar or iron pipe. He's trying to force the front door open. You need to hurry. I don't know what he'll do if he gets inside or if he decides to come over to my house. Officers are en route, ma'am. Please stay inside and keep your doors locked. Back on the porch, Davin set the pry bar down and ran his fingers over the freshly sanded wood of the doorframe. It felt smooth. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression of satisfaction. This was his house, his home. He reached for his water bottle, unscrewing the cap and taking a long drink, utterly unaware that the peace he had bled for overseas was about to be shattered in his own front yard. He heard them before he saw them. The high-pitched whine of approaching sirens cut through the serene autumn afternoon, growing louder, more frantic. Devon's military instincts flared instantly. His heart rate ticked up, his eyes scanning the perimeter, assessing the street, checking sight lines. It was muscle memory, ingrained by a decade of war. But he forced himself to relax. You're in Virginia, man, he told himself. It's just an ambulance or a fire truck. But the sirens didn't pass by. 2 blue and white Alexandria Police Department cruisers violently rounded the corner of Sycamore Lane, tires screeching against the asphalt. They accelerated down the quiet street, their light bars flashing a blinding, strobe light assault of red and blue against the autumn foliage. The cruisers slammed on their brakes directly in front of Devon's house, jumping the curb slightly and parking at aggressive, blocking angles. Devon stood completely still on his porch, the water bottle still in his hand. He watched, his expression hardening into a stoic, unreadable mask as the doors of the cruisers flew open. "Drop the weapon! Drop it right now and put your hands where I can see them." The voice was shrill, amplified by adrenaline and fear. It belonged to Officer Tilden Tucker, a 12-year veteran of the force who had a reputation for being aggressive, jumpy, and rigidly uncompromising. Tucker had his service weapon drawn, the barrel leveled squarely at Devon's chest. From the second cruiser, Officer Brian Cooper emerged. Cooper was much younger, fresh out of the academy, and though he had his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun, he looked uncertain, his eyes darting between Devon and his senior partner. Devon's mind processed the scene with cold, terrifying efficiency. 2 shooters, one highly agitated, weapon drawn, finger hovering near the trigger guard. Distance, roughly 30 feet. No cover. He didn't panic. He didn't shout back. He knew exactly how statistically dangerous this moment was for a black man in America, regardless of what uniform he had once worn. Slowly, deliberately, Devon opened his fingers, letting the plastic water bottle fall to the wooden floorboards of the porch. It hit with a dull thud, water spilling over his boots. "Officers," Devon said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, projecting calmly across the lawn. "I am unarmed. That was a water bottle. The tool is on the ground to my left." "I said put your hands in the air. Step away from the door," Tucker screamed, his face flushing red. He advanced a few steps up the walkway, his gun completely fixed on Devon. "Do it now, or I will drop you." Devon raised his hands slowly, palms open and facing forward, fingers spread. He took 2 slow, measured steps away from the front door, moving down the porch steps onto the brick walkway. "I am complying," Devon said, his voice deadly calm. "I am the homeowner. My name is Devon Perry. I live here." "Shut up! Turn around! Face away from me!" Tucker barked. Officer Cooper jogged up behind Tucker, pulling out his taser. "Sir, please just do what he says," Cooper said, his voice cracking slightly. Devon stopped, his hands still raised. He looked directly into Tucker's eyes. He saw the panic there, the dangerous mix of authority and fear. "Officer," Devon said, keeping his tone even, de-escalating the way he had been trained to do with panicked insurgents overseas. "My wallet is in my back right pocket. My Virginia driver's license is inside, bearing this exact address. The deed to the house is inside on the kitchen counter. I bought this property 3 weeks ago." "I'm not going to tell you again," Tucker roared, spittle flying from his lips. He stepped forward, grabbing Devon roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around with unnecessary force. Devon's jaw tightened. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure, defensive adrenaline through his system. If this were a combat zone, the man grabbing him would be on the ground with a broken arm in a fraction of a second. But Devon clamped down on his instincts. He let himself be turned. He remained rigid, a pillar of stone, as Tucker kicked his legs apart. "Hands behind your back," Tucker growled, holstering his weapon and pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. "You are making a mistake," Devon said softly, looking straight ahead at the front door of the home he had worked his entire life to own. "I make the calls here, buddy," Tucker sneered. He grabbed Devon's left wrist, wrenching it backward with enough force to strain the shoulder joint. Devon didn't wince. He didn't make a sound. He simply allowed the officer to clamp the cold steel around his wrist. The metal bit into his skin, tight and unforgiving. Tucker ratcheted the cuffs down hard, clicking them several times until they were painfully snug against the bone. Then he grabbed the right arm, yanking it back to meet the left, locking the second cuff. The sound of the ratcheting metal echoed in Devon's ears. It was a sound he associated with enemy combatants, with prisoners of war. To hear it applied to himself on his own property felt like a physical blow to his chest. "Got him secured," Tucker told Cooper, though he was breathing heavily, as if he had just wrestled a wild animal instead of handcuffing a completely compliant man. "Check his pockets," Tucker ordered. Cooper stepped forward, reaching into Devon's back pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it, his eyes scanning the ID. Tom?" Cooper murmured, looking at the license and then up at the house numbers above the door. "It says Devon Perry. Address is 412 Sycamore Lane. This is his house." Tucker snatched the wallet from Cooper's hands. He squinted at the license, his jaw working furiously. "Anybody can fake an ID," Tucker snapped, unwilling to back down, unwilling to admit the massive, humiliating error he was currently making. And it doesn't explain what he was doing trying to pry the door open with a crowbar. "I was sanding the frame to fix a sticking hinge," Devon said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the gentle, de-escalating tone and adopting the hard, authoritative edge of a ranger squad leader. "The sander is on the porch. The door is unlocked. If you had taken 10 seconds to assess the situation instead of drawing a lethal weapon on a civilian, you would have seen that." "Don't you talk to me about assessing a situation," Tucker shouted, pushing Devon hard in the back, forcing him to stumble forward onto the grass. "You sit down on the curb and shut your mouth until I figure out what the hell is going on here." Devon caught his balance before falling, his core muscles locking up. He turned his head slowly to look at Tucker. The sheer intensity in Devon's dark eyes made the veteran police officer take a subconscious half-step backward. It was a look forged in the fires of places Tucker could never even comprehend. "I will not sit on the curb," Devon said. "Excuse me." Tucker's hand went immediately to his belt, resting on his baton. "I said I will not sit on the curb," Devon repeated, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet street. "I am on my own property. I have broken no laws. I have provided you with identification proving my residence. You have illegally detained me, and you have assaulted me. I will stand right here on my lawn." By now, the flashing lights had drawn an audience. Doors across Sycamore Lane were opening. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, were stepping out onto their manicured lawns. A few of them, including Brenda Higgins, were holding up their smartphones, recording the spectacle. Devon felt the heat of their stares. He saw the glowing screens. They were watching him like an animal in a cage. A dangerous thug who had finally been caught. The humiliation was a toxic, burning acid in his throat. He had bled for these people. He had watched good men die in the dirt, so that people like Brenda Higgins could sleep soundly in their climate-controlled fortresses, completely insulated from the horrors of the world. And this was his reward: to be paraded in chains for their entertainment. "Listen to me, you arrogant punk," Tucker hissed, stepping close to Devon, invading his personal space. The officer smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. "I can arrest you right now for resisting, for disorderly conduct, for failing to obey a lawful order. I can make your life a living hell. Do not test me. You don't have the authority to give me a lawful order on my own property without reasonable suspicion of a crime, which was dispelled the moment your partner read my driver's license," Devon replied, quoting the law with icy precision. "You are running on ego, Officer Tucker, and you are digging a hole you cannot climb out of." Tucker's eyes widened. The fact that the suspect was not only defiant, but articulate and legally informed, infuriated him further. "Cooper, get him in the back of the cruiser. We're taking him in for obstruction." "Tom, wait," Cooper said, stepping between them. The rookie was sweating now, looking panicked. "We should run the plates on the car in the garage. We should call a supervisor, if he really owns this place." "I give the orders, Cooper," Tucker shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing Devon by the biceps and attempting to drag him toward the squad car. Devon planted his feet. He didn't strike the officer. He didn't fight back. He simply lowered his center of gravity and rooted himself to the earth. Tucker pulled, straining his back. But Devon didn't move an inch. It was like trying to drag a deeply rooted oak tree. "Move!" Tucker screamed, pulling his baton. "Walk to the car, or I will use force." "You already have," Devon said. His wrists were bleeding now, the tight steel cutting into his skin as Tucker yanked on his arms. The pain was sharp, but Devon pushed it to a distant corner of his mind. He was in the zone now. The combat calm had fully descended upon him. He was no longer just a homeowner. He was a soldier, holding a position against an aggressive adversary. "Officer Tucker," Devon said, his voice booming over the sound of the idling police cruisers, ensuring every neighbor recording on their phones could hear him. "I am a decorated combat veteran of the United States Army. I hold a high-level security clearance with the Department of Defense. If you strike me with that baton, if you force me into the back of that car, I promise you by the end of the day, you will not have a badge." Tucker paused, his baton raised. The absolute certainty in Devon's voice gave him a momentary pause. But the cameras were rolling. His authority had been challenged in front of a rookie and a street full of civilians. He couldn't back down. "We'll see about that," Tucker sneered. He raised the baton higher, preparing to strike Devon in the back of the knee to force him down. Before the baton could fall, the deep, bass-heavy rumble of a massive engine vibrated through the pavement. It wasn't another police cruiser. Rolling down Sycamore Lane at a slow, imposing crawl was a convoy. 2 black Chevrolet Suburbans flanked a pristine, armored Lincoln Navigator. The vehicles had pitch-black tinted windows, heavy reinforced grilles, and government plates that did not belong to the local municipality. The sheer presence of the vehicles was suffocating. They moved with a predatory grace, cutting through the idyllic suburban street like sharks moving through a coral reef. The neighbors lowered their phones, murmuring in confusion. Even Officer Tucker froze, his baton still suspended in the air, his eyes tracking the dark convoy. The vehicles came to a halt right in the middle of the street, effectively boxing in the 2 police cruisers. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars reflected off the glossy black paint of the armored SUV. Then the doors of the Suburbans opened simultaneously. 4 men in dark, tailored suits stepped out. They moved with identical, terrifying efficiency, their eyes scanning the perimeter, hands resting subtly near their waistbands. They were Secret Service or elite private security. That much was instantly obvious to anyone watching. They took up positions around the Lincoln Navigator. One of the men, wearing an earpiece, stepped forward and pulled open the heavy, reinforced rear passenger door of the Lincoln. A heavy, leather combat boot stepped out onto the asphalt. The man who emerged from the vehicle did not look like he belonged in Oakwood Estates. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with hair the color of steel wool cropped high and tight. He wore a perfectly tailored Class A military dress uniform. The dark green fabric was immaculate, but it was the shoulders and the chest that drew every eye on the street. On each of his epaulets rested 4 silver stars. On his left breast was a fruit salad of ribbons and medals, so extensive it looked like a tapestry of modern American warfare. At the very top, unmistakable even from a distance, was the pale blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor. This was General Alan Cooper, Commander of United States Special Operations Command, a man who answered directly to the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States, a man whose very whisper could mobilize fleets and level cities, and he was looking directly at Devon Perry. General Cooper's eyes, a piercing, icy blue, swept over the scene. He saw the police cruisers. He saw the drawn baton. He saw the blood trickling down the wrists of the man in handcuffs. The air on Sycamore Lane seemed to drop 10 degrees. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the armored vehicles. General Cooper bypassed his security detail, stepping onto the grass of Devon's lawn. He didn't look at Officer Tucker. He didn't look at Officer Cooper. He walked straight toward Devon, his posture rigidly perfect, his expression a thundercloud of barely contained fury. Tucker finally found his voice, though it was weak and trembling. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. You need to step back behind the—" General Cooper didn't even turn his head. He simply raised one gloved hand, a single sharp gesture that commanded absolute silence. "Officer," Cooper's voice was gravel and iron. It wasn't loud, but it carried the devastating weight of absolute authority. "If you do not remove those cuffs from my godson in the next 5 seconds, I will have my security detail dismantle you." The silence that fell over Sycamore Lane was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The autumn breeze seemed to stop dead, leaving the rustling oak leaves suspended in a frozen tableau. Every neighbor, every ringing cell phone, every chirping bird was abruptly muted by the sheer, gravitational pull of General Alan Cooper's command. Officer Tilden Tucker stood paralyzed. His baton was still raised halfway to his shoulder, a physical monument to his aggressively shattered authority. His brain, previously flooded with the toxic cocktail of adrenaline and unchecked ego, simply could not process the visual data in front of him. A 4-star general, a convoy of armored government vehicles, and a highly trained security detail were standing on the lawn of the man he had just assaulted and humiliated. Tucker stammered, his voice cracking like dry wood. He slowly lowered the baton, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing figure of the general and the stoic, bleeding man in handcuffs. "Sir, we had a 911 call of a burglary in progress. We were just securing the scene." General Cooper did not blink. He stepped closer, invading Tucker's personal space with the calculated, predatory grace of a man who had commanded thousands of troops in actual combat zones. The general did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet, lethal intensity of his tone was far more terrifying than any shout. "I will not repeat myself, officer," Cooper said, each word a distinct, chiseled piece of granite. "You have 3 seconds to remove those restraints before I have my men physically strip them from you." 1. Officer Brian Cooper, the rookie, broke first. He had spent the last 10 minutes suffocating under a blanket of growing dread, acutely aware that this situation was spiraling out of control. The moment Cooper spoke, Cooper recognized the catastrophic career and legal jeopardy they were in. He shoved past Tucker, practically throwing himself toward Devon. I've got it, sir," Cooper babbled, his hands shaking so violently he fumbled with the small universal handcuff key. "I'm sorry, Mr. Perry. I'm so sorry." Cooper jammed the key into the locking mechanism. With 2 sharp clicks, the rigid steel jaws released. Devon brought his arms forward slowly. The relief in his shoulder joints was immediate, but the damage to his wrists was visible. Deep, raw indentations circled his forearms, the skin torn and weeping small trails of bright red blood. He rubbed his wrists mechanically, his face remaining a completely unreadable mask. He didn't look at the officers. His eyes were fixed entirely on the older man standing before him. "Uncle Art," Devon said quietly, the rigid military bearing softening just a fraction. "Devon," General Cooper replied, the ice in his eyes melting as he looked at his godson. The general stepped forward and, ignoring the blood and the dirt, pulled Devon into a firm, grounding embrace. It was a fiercely protective gesture, a stark contrast to the sterile, aggressive violence the police had just inflicted. "I'm all right," Devon murmured over the general's shoulder. "No, you are most certainly not," Cooper said, stepping back and examining Devon's bleeding wrists with a clinician's eye. The anger returned to the general's face, sharper and more focused than before. He turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Officer Tucker like a laser targeting system. Tucker took a physical step backward, bumping into the side of his cruiser. He looked instinctively toward his radio, a desperate urge to call for backup bubbling in his chest. But who do you call for backup against a 4-star general and a federal security detail? "Name and badge number," Cooper demanded. "Officer Tilden Tucker, badge number 4402, Tucker answered automatically, the ingrained obedience to a superior authority overriding his panic. "Officer Tucker," Cooper said, stepping onto the pavement. "You arrived at this residence responding to a call. You encountered a man on his own property, engaging in home maintenance. You did not ask questions. You did not assess the environment. You drew a lethal weapon on a compliant civilian, illegally detained him, and physically assaulted him after he provided government-issued identification proving his residency. "Sir, standard operating procedure dictates." Tucker tried to interject, a final, pathetic attempt to shield himself with department policy. "Do not speak to me about standard operating procedure." Cooper's voice cracked like a rifle shot, finally unleashing a fraction of his fury. The sound made a few of the watching neighbors flinch. "I wrote the tactical engagement protocols for urban combat environments that your department attempts to mimic. You lacked reasonable suspicion, you lacked probable cause, and you completely lacked common sense. You operated on prejudice and ego." Cooper signaled to the lead agent of his security detail, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit who had been watching the exchange with cold, detached professionalism. "Agent Miller, contact the Alexandria Chief of Police. Tell him he has exactly 10 minutes to present himself at 412 Sycamore Lane. If he is not here, I will personally contact the mayor, the governor, and the Department of Justice." "Yes, General," Agent Miller said, instantly raising a radio to his lips. Tucker looked sick. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a waxy, sallow white. He looked at Cooper, hoping for some kind of solidarity, but the rookie had distanced himself, standing near the trunk of the cruiser, staring at his boots in profound shame. Davin remained on the grass, the autumn sun beating down on his shoulders. He felt a strange detachment from the scene unfolding in front of him. The adrenaline was leaving his system, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion. He had spent years fighting for a country that still, in its quietest, most privileged corners, viewed him as an inherent threat. "Who made the call?" Devon asked suddenly. His voice was quiet, but it cut clearly through the tension. General Cooper turned to him. "What?" "The 911 call," Devon said, turning his gaze away from the officers and sweeping it across the street, looking at the small clusters of neighbors standing on their lawns and driveways. "Someone called them. Someone watched me working on my own house and decided my existence here was an emergency." The dynamic on Sycamore Lane shifted instantly. The spectacle of police overreach had been thrilling for the neighbors to record from the safety of their porches, but Devon's question brought the harsh reality of the situation directly to their doorsteps. The glowing screens of smartphones began to lower. People shifted uncomfortably, suddenly avoiding eye contact with the towering veteran and the furious general. Across the street, standing behind the immaculate hedges of 415 Sycamore Lane, Brenda Higgins felt a cold knot of genuine terror form in her stomach. When she had made the call, she felt righteous. She felt like the protector of her pristine community. But watching the horrifying cascade of events, the drawn guns, the handcuffs, the blood, and now the terrifying arrival of the military elite, the true weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had almost gotten a man killed. She took a slow, trembling step backward, hoping to fade into the shadows of her wraparound porch and slip quietly into her house. But Devon's eyes had already found her. He remembered the twitching blinds. He remembered the feeling of being watched. "Her," Devon said, pointing a single, steady finger across the asphalt directly at Brenda. "She was watching me from the window before I even picked up the sander." General Cooper turned, his gaze following Devon's hand. The security detail shifted seamlessly, reorienting their attention toward the woman across the street. Brenda froze, trapped like a rabbit in the headlights of an oncoming train. "Agent Miller," Cooper said without looking away from Brenda. "Retrieve the 911 dispatch audio for this incident immediately. I want to know exactly what was said." Before Miller could comply, the wail of another siren pierced the air. An unmarked black Ford Explorer, its grille lined with flashing strobe lights, tore down the street, braking sharply behind the armored convoy. The doors flew open, and Chief of Police Robert Harrison stepped out. Chief Harrison was a pragmatic, politically savvy man who had spent 3 decades navigating the complex optics of modern policing. He had been in a budget meeting when the frantic call came through from dispatch that a 4-star general was holding 2 of his officers hostage on a front lawn. Harrison jogged up the street, taking in the catastrophic scene. The armored SUVs, the elite security, his rookie looking suicidal, his veteran officer looking paralyzed, and a bleeding black man standing next to General Alan Cooper. Harrison recognized Cooper immediately. Anyone who operated near the Pentagon knew the face of the commander of special operations. "General Cooper," Chief Harrison said, breathing heavily as he approached, offering a salute that Cooper deliberately ignored. "Sir, I am Chief Harrison. I apologize for the delay. Can you please explain to me what is happening here?" "Chief Harrison," Cooper said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt, "I am here to extract my godson, a highly decorated combat veteran and an elite cybersecurity contractor for the Department of Defense, from the illegal custody of your incompetent officers." Harrison winced, his eyes darting to Devon's bloody wrists. "Sir, if there has been a misunderstanding—" "A misunderstanding," Cooper interrupted, taking a step towards the chief. "A misunderstanding is a parking ticket. What happened here is an aggravated assault under color of authority." Officer Tucker drew his firearm on an unarmed homeowner. He applied restraints with excessive force after the homeowner provided proof of residence. He attempted to use a baton to force compliance to an unlawful order. Harrison looked at Tucker, his expression hardening. "Tucker, is this true?" Tucker opened his mouth, but no words came out. The presence of his chief, combined with the federal spotlight currently burning a hole through him, eradicated his last ounce of bravado. "Chief Harrison," General Cooper continued, his voice dropping into a dangerously quiet register, "what your officers did today is not just a grotesque violation of Devon's civil rights. It is a massive breach of national security protocols." Harrison blinked, thoroughly confused. "National security, sir. Devon Perry," Cooper stated, gesturing to his godson, "is currently the lead architect on a highly classified, multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity initiative designed to protect the Eastern Seaboard's power grid from foreign, state-sponsored hacking. He holds a top-secret/SCI clearance. He was scheduled to brief me and 2 members of the Joint Chiefs this afternoon at this residence to ensure the security of his remote servers. Instead, your men compromised his physical security, injured him, and created a spectacle that has now been recorded by every bored civilian on this street." The revelation struck the street like a physical shockwave. The murmurs among the neighbors ceased entirely. Brenda Higgins covered her mouth with a trembling hand, feeling physically ill. The dangerous thug she had reported wasn't just a homeowner. He was a man guarding the nation's infrastructure. Chief Harrison swallowed hard, realizing that this incident wasn't going to be a localized HR issue. This was going to involve federal investigations, congressional oversight, and a media firestorm that would end his career. "General, I assure you, this will be handled with the utmost severity," Harrison said, his voice grave. "These officers will be suspended immediately pending a full internal affairs investigation. We will cooperate fully with any federal inquiries." "You damn well will," Cooper said, "because the Department of Defense will be opening its own inquiry into how a cleared defense contractor was targeted and assaulted at his primary operational residence." Cooper turned away from the chief, dismissing him entirely. He walked back to Devon, who was still standing quietly, watching the neighborhood that had so quickly turned on him. "Let's get you inside, son," Cooper said softly, placing a hand on Devon's back. "We need to get those wrists cleaned up, and we have a briefing to prepare for." Devon nodded slowly. He looked one last time at Officer Tucker, who was now being stripped of his badge and gun by Chief Harrison. Then Devon looked across the street, locking eyes with Brenda Higgins one final time. He didn't sneer. He didn't gloat. He simply offered her a look of profound, devastating pity. As Devon turned and walked up the steps of his home, followed by the general and his security detail, the heavy oak door closed firmly behind them, shutting out the chaos of the suburban street. The quiet had returned to 412 Sycamore Lane, but the neighborhood of Oakwood Estates would never be the same. The heavy mahogany front door of 412 Sycamore Lane clicked shut, and the absolute silence of the house's interior enveloped them like a protective vault. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady bass line, a stark contrast to the chaotic sirens and screaming that had just poisoned the autumn afternoon. Devon Perry stood in the foyer of his new home, the adrenaline finally crashing out of his bloodstream, leaving behind a cold, heavy exhaustion. He looked down at his wrists. The skin was brutally torn, the deep purple bruising already spreading outward from the raw lacerations. The physical pain was sharp, but the psychological toll was a suffocating weight on his chest. He had survived the Korangal Valley. He had survived night raids in Kandahar. But he had never felt as defenseless as he had 10 minutes ago, handcuffed on his own freshly manicured lawn. "Sit down, Devon," General Alan Cooper ordered, his voice shedding the terrifying, booming authority he had used outside, replacing it with the firm, grounding tone of a surrogate father. Devon walked into the expansive living room. The space was mostly empty, save for a few unpacked cardboard boxes and a massive distressed leather sofa he had maneuvered inside just yesterday. He sank into the couch, resting his forearms on his knees, staring blankly at the polished oak floorboards. Agent Miller, the imposing head of the general's security detail, didn't wait for instructions. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a combat medic. From a tactical bag slung over his shoulder, Miller produced a black medical kit. He knelt in front of Devon, snapping on a pair of blue nitrile gloves. "May I, sir?" Miller asked quietly. Devon nodded. Miller began to clean the wounds with antiseptic wipes. The alcohol bit viciously into the torn skin, but Devon didn't flinch. His face remained a stoic, unreadable mask, though his jaw muscles feathered with tension. General Cooper paced the length of the living room, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The pristine green fabric of his dress uniform sharply contrasted with the civilian surroundings. He was vibrating with a cold, calculated fury. He had seen men wounded in combat, but seeing his godson, a man of immense intellect, honor, and service, bleeding because of the fragile ego of a local cop and the weaponized paranoia of a suburban housewife, was a different kind of outrage entirely. "They ratcheted them down to the bone," Agent Miller muttered, his professional detachment slipping just enough to reveal his disgust. He applied sterile gauze pads to the deepest cuts, securing them with tight wraps of cohesive medical tape. "You're going to have severe neuropathy in these hands for a few weeks, Mr. Perry. The radial nerves took a heavy beating." "It's fine, Miller," Devon said, his voice raspy. "I've had worse." "That is entirely beside the point," Cooper snapped, stopping his pacing to look out the front window. Through the glass, he could see Chief Harrison standing over Officer Tucker, who was currently removing his duty belt, his career evaporating on the pavement. The neighborhood had retreated into their homes, the street now unnervingly empty, save for the flashing lights. "Uncle Art," Devon said, looking up. "The briefing. The servers are set up in the basement office. We can still pull the encrypted files for the Pentagon review." Cooper turned, his icy blue eyes softening slightly. "Devon, the Pentagon grid can wait 24 hours. You are not running a top-secret infrastructure briefing while you are bleeding onto your own floorboards. Right now, our only objective is dismantling the people who did this to you." Before Devon could respond, a second member of the security detail, a communications specialist named Agent Vance, stepped into the living room holding a heavily encrypted government tablet. "General," Agent Vance said, his voice clipped and urgent, "I bypassed the local dispatch firewall and pulled the original 911 audio file, as you requested." Cooper's posture went rigid. "Play it." Vance tapped the screen of the tablet, linking it to the small, tactical Bluetooth speaker clipped to his tactical vest. The room filled with the sterile, recorded ring of the Alexandria 911 dispatch center, followed by the calm voice of the operator. "911, what is your emergency?" Then came the voice of Brenda Higgins. Through the high-fidelity speaker, her panic didn't just sound fearful. It sounded performative. It sounded like a woman fully aware of the lethal power she was invoking. "Yes, I need police at 412 Sycamore Lane immediately," Brenda's recorded voice whispered frantically. "There is a large, dangerous-looking man breaking into the house across the street. The owners moved out months ago." The dispatcher asked for a description. "He's African-American, very tall, muscular. He's wearing raggedy clothes and he has a weapon, some kind of crowbar or iron pipe." Devon closed his eyes. Raggedy clothes. He was wearing his favorite broken-in workout gear. A weapon. It was a standard wood sander and a pry bar to fix a hinge. But it was the next part of the recording that made the temperature in the living room plummet. "Ma'am, is he actively trying to force the door, or just on the property?" the dispatcher asked, trying to establish the severity of the threat. There was a pause on the tape. A moment where Brenda Higgins realized that simply reporting a man on a porch might not elicit the overwhelming, immediate armed response she desired. She needed to escalate. She needed to make it a life-or-death situation. "He's violently smashing the door!" Brenda shrieked into the phone, a complete fabrication. "He just looked right at my house. I think he has a gun in his waistband. You need to send everyone right now before he starts shooting or comes over here." The audio clicked off. The silence in the living room was deafening. Agent Miller stopped packing his medical kit, his jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to fracture. General Cooper stood perfectly still, his eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute clarity. Devon looked at his bandaged wrists. He realized in that agonizing moment that Officer Tucker, as aggressive and biased as he was, had arrived on the scene completely primed for a lethal shootout. Tucker had been told by a trusted community member that there was a violent, armed man actively breaking into a home. "She swatted me," Devon said quietly, the terminology of the digital warfare world bleeding into his real life. "She lied about a firearm to guarantee a tactical response. She tried to get me killed." Cooper slowly walked over to the sofa and sat down next to his godson. The four-star general placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Devon's shoulder. "Yes, she did," Cooper said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Officer Tucker is a violent, egotistical fool who violated his oath. The Department of Justice will handle him. He will lose his badge, his pension, and his freedom. But the woman across the street? The woman who weaponized the police force as her own personal hit squad?" Cooper leaned forward, locking eyes with Devon. "We are going to take everything she has." The fallout was biblical. By Wednesday morning, The incident at 412 Sycamore Lane had mutated from a quiet suburban nightmare into a massive national scandal. The presence of a 4-star military general, combined with the involvement of a highly cleared defense contractor, meant the story bypassed local news entirely and exploded directly onto the front pages of major national outlets. "Hero veteran assaulted in own yard," read the headline of the Washington Post. Cable news networks ran looped footage recorded by the neighbors, showing the towering, decorated soldier remaining perfectly stoic while an unhinged police officer wrenched his arms behind his back. The Alexandria Police Department was utterly decimated by the federal pressure. Within 48 hours, Chief Harrison was forced to hold a live press conference. Looking visibly aged and sweating under the harsh studio lights, the chief announced the immediate termination and arrest of Officer Tilden Tucker. The veteran cop was being indicted by the local district attorney, heavily pressured by the Department of Justice, on charges of aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Officer Brian Cooper, the rookie, resigned from the force 3 days later, releasing a tearful public apology to Devon, citing a toxic culture of aggressive policing that he lacked the courage to stand up against. But the true, agonizing reckoning was reserved for Brenda Higgins. For the first 2 days, Brenda had barricaded herself inside her home at 415 Sycamore Lane. She watched the news in absolute horror, realizing the magnitude of the hornet's nest she had kicked. She attempted to play the victim, calling a local reporter to claim she was just a concerned citizen looking out for her neighborhood, terrified by a misunderstanding. Then, Devon's legal team released the unredacted 911 audio to the public. The moment the world heard Brenda explicitly lie about Devon possessing a gun and violently smashing windows, any shred of public sympathy vaporized. She wasn't a concerned neighbor. She was a predator who had used the 911 system as a loaded weapon. 2 weeks after the incident, the quiet of Sycamore Lane was broken once again. But this time, it wasn't a squad car. It was a sleek, black town car that parked directly in front of Brenda's house. 2 men in sharp gray suits stepped out. They were process servers, accompanied by a single detective from the Alexandria Police Department. Brenda opened her door a fraction, the chain still engaged, her face pale and drawn. "Brenda Higgins?" the detective asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Ma'am, I am serving you with a grand jury indictment for the felony charge of falsely reporting an emergency resulting in bodily harm," the detective said, his voice utterly devoid of sympathy. Simultaneously, the process server slipped a thick, heavy manila envelope through the crack in the door. "Ms. Higgins, you have also been officially served with a civil lawsuit filed by Mr. Devon Perry. He is suing you for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations under the doctrine of malicious prosecution. The damages sought are in excess of $5 million. Brenda slumped against the door frame, the heavy envelope slipping from her trembling fingers and hitting the floor with a devastating thud. The neighborhood she had tried so desperately to protect from Devon was now watching her undoing. The other neighbors, who had once shared her gossipy tendencies, now shunned her entirely, terrified of being associated with the woman who had brought federal wrath upon their pristine subdivision. Across the street, Devon Perry stood on his front porch. It was a Friday evening. The air was cool, the sun dipping below the tree line, casting long, golden shadows across the emerald lawns of Oakwood Estates. Devon was dressed in a comfortable gray sweater and dark jeans. The bandages were gone from his wrists, though a faint, pale scar remained on his left forearm, a permanent reminder of his first day in his new home. He held a steaming mug of black coffee, watching the process servers leave Brenda's property. He felt no vindictive joy, no triumphant glee. He only felt a profound, settling sense of closure. He had not run. He had not sold the house and retreated to a safer, more isolated piece of land. He had dug his boots into the soil of Sycamore Lane and held his ground. A silver sedan pulled into his driveway, interrupting his thoughts. The engine cut off, and Alan Cooper stepped out. He wasn't wearing his 4-star uniform today. He wore a simple tweed jacket, slacks, and a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses tucked into his breast pocket. Today, he wasn't the commander of special operations. He was just Uncle Art, arriving for a Friday night dinner. Cooper walked up the brick pathway, looking at the newly sanded and perfectly painted front door frame. "Hinges look good," Cooper noted, a warm, genuine smile breaking across his weathered face. "Smooth as glass," Devon replied, stepping aside to let the older man pass. Cooper paused on the threshold, turning to look out over the street. He looked at the drawn blinds of 415 Sycamore Lane, then back to his godson. The young man who had survived the worst the world had to offer, who had fought for the ideals of a country that often struggled to live up to them. "You doing okay, son?" Cooper asked softly. Devon took a sip of his coffee, his dark eyes surveying his property, his sanctuary. The street was quiet, not the aggressive, exclusionary quiet it had been weeks ago, but a peaceful, respectful silence. He had fought his battle, and he had won his peace. "Yeah, Uncle Art," Devon said, a profound, unbreakable resilience settling over his broad shoulders. "I'm exactly where I belong. Let's go inside. I've got steaks on the grill." He turned and walked into his home, leaving the door wide open behind him, utterly unafraid of whoever might be watching. Thank you for watching this incredible real-life story of resilience, justice, and the fight against prejudice. If Devon's unyielding courage and General Cooper's powerful intervention resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support for our veterans. Share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness about the realities of profiling and the importance of standing your ground. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss out on more gripping, true-to-life stories. Your support helps us bring more powerful narratives to light. See you next time.